We know that there are a lot of practical obstacles that mobile EU citizens face when they're trying to get involved in politics in the country that they're living in. And so what we tried to do in this Vote Brussels campaign is take what we know about those practical obstacles and see what we can do to overcome them by using some of the best practices that are out there to try and actually inform and help EU citizens to use their right to vote, in this case for the Belgian local elections in October 2018. Information is a big obstacle. Most people at the start of this campaign didn't know that they had the right to vote, and they didn't know even that there were local elections. And honestly, that's normal. Most Belgians wouldn't know this because one of the practical obstacles for mobile EU citizens is that they have to register to vote, whereas in Belgium, voting is obligatory for Belgian citizens. So the campaigns actually don't start until September, and yet EU citizens have to register in July. So at the beginning of the campaign, most people didn't know that they had to register to vote and that there were elections. At the end of the campaign, people did know that they had the right to vote, but they didn't understand obligatory voting. And so there were a lot of myths about that discouraged a lot of people from signing up. And they also didn't know what the electoral issues were because the campaign wasn't going to start until September. So they didn't have the same kind of information that many Belgian citizens will have that will later motivate them to vote. So information was the major obstacle that we had to overcome. I would say in addition to that, there are also practical obstacles that EU citizens face when local politicians and local authorities don't provide them good information. So registering as a resident in Belgium, depending on your commune, can be a really difficult, time-consuming, humiliating process. And so because of those obstacles to residence registration, many EU citizens are discouraged from going through voter registration, which they worry will be just as complicated. And in addition, unfortunately, many local authorities here don't do a lot of outreach to get EU citizens involved in local politics. Often the only thing that they do is a few months before the voter registration election, they send out a letter or a brochure or a website telling them that they can register to vote. But they haven't done a lot before to get them to register to vote, and they haven't done a lot to get them involved in local committees, getting local information. So generally speaking, EU citizens lack information about how to get involved in local politics, and getting involved as an elector is just one of the problems that they face. So the registration deadline for EU citizens to sign up to vote was the 31st of July. And so we started in January to train volunteers from the European institutions and ordinary EU citizens so that they could go out and reach EU citizens in any way possible over the months before the registration deadline. We did almost 100 events where we reached face-to-face nearly 3,000 EU citizens. On average, our volunteers would talk to people for around 20 minutes. Sometimes it would just be with a brochure and have a one-on-one conversation for a minute. Sometimes it would be a full presentation about how to sign up to vote, what powers local authorities have in Belgium, and how their vote can make a difference. In addition to these face-to-face meetings, we also did a lot of digital work through social media, since EU citizens often are young, are working, are traveling a lot, so they don't have a lot of time to go and meet you face-to-face and have their questions answered. So we did a lot of Facebook posts about why voting matters, what are the local issues, and we also did some fun surveys that helped people to discover what voting would be in Belgium. For example, we helped people discover what their Brussels personality was. So you could take a personality test and you could see whether you were a Eurostar, or you were a Waterloo Lion, or you were a Pluxellois. So it basically helped people to realize, I've lived here now for several years and I pay my taxes here. I am actually part of this city, even if I don't speak French or Dutch, and I have issues that I care about. So we helped people get a lot of information that made them realize why they had local interests that they should defend in local elections. Voting is complicated, and it involves not only your right but a lot of obligations. So people want to really be sure that they understand this procedure. And unfortunately, things like your rights, including your voting rights, are often explained in language that can only be studied understood if you've studied the law, you know? You need to actually have a legal degree to understand a lot of the texts that were being produced by the local authorities. So one of the things we did in Vote Brussels is we gave them a lot of free advice through focus groups with EU citizens on how they needed to speak in simple, clear terms so that people could understand what they were signing up to in French, in Dutch, or in English. So indeed, it's also helpful to provide information in English just so that people know that they properly understand what they've signed up to in French or Dutch. And it also is a really great way to just reach out to people. Because when all of a sudden you see Brussels and EU citizens in Brussels talked about in English or Polish or Romanian or Italian or Spanish, you start to think that actually the authorities want you to participate, and they're reaching out to you and they're making a very strong symbolic gesture that you are an equal part of this society. We're now recommending to the Brussels communes and the region that they make voter registration quasi-automatic. So basically what we'd like to see in the future is that every time an EU citizen comes and finishes their registration as a resident, they would then at home receive a very simple letter that explains to them what's their right to vote, what's their obligation to vote, why their vote matters, given that a third of the Brussels population are not Belgian, and then making it very easy for them to register by email.